Welcome to the 10-Minute Treasure. My name's Jeff Pospisil. And in this video, I'm going to talk about the big change coming down from the Department of Labor, where they are increasing the minimum salary for exempt employees. And you might think exempt employees have a minimum salary, and that's true. There's a minimum wage for non-exempt employees, but there's also a minimum salary test for whether or not a church or an employee is exempt. And so we're going to look at that, and I'm going to guide you on how your church can navigate this and hopefully better classify your employees as either exempt or non-exempt. Before I dive into the Department of Labor ruling and how your church can navigate that, I want to make sure we're on the same page when it comes to exempt versus non-exempt employees. So every single employee needs to be declared either exempt or determined to be exempt or non-exempt. And there is specific criteria for this, by the way. So you can't just do it willy-nilly, but every single employee is either exempt or non-exempt. And you might say exempt from what? And it's exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of sounds kind of silly. You're exempt from fair labor, but no, it's really saying that you don't have to worry about if somebody is exempt. You don't have to worry about overtime pay. So, if you are non-exempt, every hour you work over 40 hours in a week, you are entitled to time and a half. And also, you are entitled to minimum wage. And so if your state has adopted a minimum wage, it's going to be higher than the 725, which is the federal minimum wage. And so here's just a listing of all the minimum wages. I'll put a link to that as well as this Paychex article. So the big difference is that if you are non-exempt, meaning the Fair Labor Standards Act applies to you, you're going to have to track hours. And think about that in a ministry settings. Think about that if you had to have your youth pastor track work time. A lot of times that person's exempt, but let's just say they were non-exempt. How chaotic would that be, considering that maybe they're attending a high school game to support the students? All of a sudden, that's probably work time. They wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the students. Or maybe do you decide to send them on a mission trip or a lock-in event if you know that you're going to have to pay time and a half for that extra amount? So it can be kind of chaotic. And I don't know too many youth pastors that would like to keep a timesheet either. They would probably rather just have that regular salary than keep a timesheet. So now let's look at the ruling. So here is the rule change. This is the Department of Labor's website. And they have some webinars, which I'm not going to attend. They talk a little bit about what it means. And so if you are exempt, that means you're usually paid a salary or a fixed amount. And your duties are primarily executive, administrative, or professional duties. So there's a little bit more to that, but the change is that you also did have a minimum compensation requirement with being exempt. So it's not a minimum wage, but it's a weekly minimum amount. So you had to be paid $684 per week, no matter if you're part-time or full-time. That if you wanted to be exempt, you had to be paid at least this amount of money. And there are some exceptions, which I'll cover later. So that is going to jump up by over $8,000 on July 1st. And then that's going to jump up by another $15,000. So a total of what, $23,000 in just a short period of time, in just a 6-month period of time. So if you're not making over 58,656, it's going to be hard to be classified as exempt. So some of you might remember back in 2016 when we faced a similar change. And I don't know if this will play out exactly like 2016. It seems very eerily similar. But in 2016, the Obama administration tried to do a very large hike on that minimum compensation requirement for exempt employees. So that salary test. And in 2016, it was met with legal challenges. And those legal challenges were eventually resolved when we had a different president who happened to be President Trump. Well, now we have the Biden administration, which President Biden was vice president under Obama. And all of a sudden, we have this very same or very similar, maybe, change in that minimum compensation requirement for exempt employees. And we also have an election, and we'll have some legal challenges as well. I'm going to link this article because they give a little bit of that history back then and cover it well. So, all right, why don't we go ahead and look at how your church can navigate it? I want us to look at this document. This is an article I wrote for the Dakotas UMC, and it's on their website. So I'll put a link to that in the description. But it just helps the church classify whether their employees are exempt or non-exempt. And it's going to talk about some of the stuff I've already mentioned. But the key thing is it gives you the tests that you need to do on that job description. Whatever the employee regularly does, that's in their job description or should be in their job description. Those you have to go through a test. And then what to do if they are exempt, what to do if they're not exempt. But the key thing here is I like that I have this flow chart here. This flow chart will help guide you through this. So let's go ahead and walk through it. First question is, does your employee regularly engage in interstate commerce? So the Federal Labor Standards Act only applies to those employees and businesses that regularly engage in interstate commerce. So, and you might be surprised to think about this, but most employees engage in interstate commerce because maybe they're emailing a supplier or buying stuff from a supplier that's out of state, or maybe they're uploading stuff to the Facebook or to the website, and that's being accessed by people out of state. So usually it's a lot of work to actually guard your person from engaging in interstate commerce. But if they're not engaged in interstate commerce, they are exempt. Are they a clergy? So that means licensed and ordained and involved in those specific preaching, teaching, and worship types of duties. So if they are a clergy person, then they are exempt. If they're not, then you go to the religious worker test. Are they a religious worker? So they don't have to be licensed or ordained, but they do have to be involved in duties consistent with a religious worker. So are they teaching? Are they spreading the faith, church governance, those kinds of things? So if they are a religious worker, they are exempt. So if they're not a clergy, they're not a religious worker, now you get to that salary test. So that probably narrowed it down for most churches. But for nonprofits, small businesses, this is probably a key thing. So the salary test, right now it's at that 35,568. So that's going to go up by the end of the year. It'll go up to 58,000. So if they don't make at least that minimum salary, then they are non-exempt, and you're going to have to track their hours, and you're going to have to make sure you pay them overtime and at least the minimum wage. If they do make that salary, so again, it's 35,000 right now, but it's going to jump up to 58,000 by January of 2025. If they are paid that, then you also have to look at their duties. And there's a link, I think it's on the second page, if I recall. There's this link here that explains more of what those duties are. And I'll put a link to that in the description as well. So they have to be paid that minimum salary and perform these specific duties if they want to be exempt. So if they're not performing these duties of executive, administrative, or professional, then they still are an hourly worker. But if they do perform those duties and they are paid 35,000, soon to be 58,000, then they can be exempt. All right, I know that was a lot and a lot of details. I'm going to put a lot of links in the description to those articles, as well as that resource from the Dakotas UMC. And until next time, God bless you.